Am I audible, I guess, to everyone? Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a delight to have the group here, and I want to thank ITF for working with us to host it. We're pleased to have this group, and I think it's been very informative to me in researching this white paper and in reading the others that have been prepared for this event and so far in our discussion. So I'd like to acknowledge Luzardo Bolaños and Nobuhiko Daito, who are here, who worked with me on this paper over the last several months and will answer all the difficult questions that come up, and easy ones I will be happy to take. A brief overview of my outline, just on the matter of definitions, and to Professor Gouache's point just now, I think some comments on how we've defined that may be different, and so we should be aware of that as we go through the discussion. Theoretical perspectives, which we've already talked about, I'll just touch on those. A little bit about the U.S. market overview, what's happening here, and then highway, P3s, and renegotiations in the U.S., and the bulk of my time on the 6 case studies that are outlined in the white paper, and I'll give brief thumbnails on each of those, discuss, and conclude. So to go ahead, we are defining P3 renegotiations as modifications to contractual agreements, but adapting this to the U.S. market by looking at complete buyouts and bankruptcy filings. I should also say that in the data presented in the white paper, that refinancings or restructuring of finance on the private side is counted in a couple of our cases, and that would probably fall outside of the definition of Professor Gouache. So we can recalculate those numbers as we go forward, or if it comes up in the discussion. The concern that we are responding to, in addition to the interest by ITF, is the one that's been mentioned already, which is there opportunism that is costing the public purse money, and I think that's really a core question why we look at this. We don't have a clear test to evaluate motives, and we'll come back to that as a methodological challenge in attributing motives to parties in these discussions. Part of the theoretical background is this issue of opportunism, and whether that is active on the public side or on the private side or both. Do we have collusion between the public and private, has been suggested already in our discussions. Or are companies that are experienced renegotiators having an advantage in winning contracts rather than those who are most experienced at designing, building, constructing, or operating and maintaining facilities. A second consideration is whether it comes about as renegotiations come about as a result of external conditions, and I think we've talked about those already. A third possible explanation, are they an inevitable result of complex projects? P3s, especially in the US market, are often applied to more complex projects which have greater uncertainty associated with them, and that uncertainty could be seen as a trigger for renegotiations. And finally, are they occurring because of winner's curse issues that we've already mentioned earlier, with the highest bidder in the case of a brownfield, or the lowest bidder in the case of a greenfield project, then more likely to come back and ask for renegotiated terms. Okay, so to speak briefly about the U.S. market, as everybody probably knows, the U.S. market has 50 states, a federal district, a couple of territories, and assets typically are owned by the states, in some cases by localities. And so the statutory environment, the court and judicial environment are very much centered at the state level rather than at the federal level, although there are a couple of important federal policies that have a big impact in P3s, including TIFIA, which is a subordinated credit enhancement mechanism that's available from the federal government, and also the tax deductibility of municipal bonds, which gives them a more favorable cost of capital. So 33 states and Puerto Rico have enabling legislation for P3s, but as we'll see, most of the action is in California, Texas, Florida, and Virginia, where we are today. This chart, the top line shows the number of deals over the period 88 to 13. So It shows a rise in the 90s of deal flow, and this is not dollars, this is deal counts. So it's it is what it is. We can see the green line below is the number of transportation deals, which have been slowly but not quite steadily increasing, but the secular trend is clearly positive. The distribution of deals, that's not very legible, I apologize. The red on the upper right there is property. Those are or buildings, and that is some of the activity. The remainder is split pretty much between various types of water projects and various types of transportation projects. Again, this is number of deals, not dollar value of deals. This shows the distribution of highway P3s by state in the US. You can see California 4, Texas 10, Florida 13, Virginia 6. That's the bulk of the action in the US. And the renegotiations, and here's where the definition that was mentioned by Professor Gouache might come in. The 5 in Virginia includes some changes on the private side that might not be counted under your definition of a renegotiation. But only 1 renegotiation in Florida, 4 in Texas, 2 in California, and we'll be talking about some of these. Again, using this definition of P3 renegotiations, this shows over the last 20 years the number of highway P3 deals going up to about 45, and the number of renegotiations at about 18. That's at least 1 renegotiation. And in some cases we have multiple renegotiations, but they'd only show 1 time on the red line there. So I'll talk next about our case studies. They're listed on the left there, 2 in California, 1 in Indiana, and 3 in Virginia. You can see the distribution of highway P3s in the table and how our selected cases stack up. So it's not a random selection by any means, but we did try to get a range of projects. I'm going to step through these rather quickly and happy to expand on them in the discussion period. The first one was one of the first P3s, highway P3s in the US, the State Route 91 in the Los Angeles metro area. It was a 10-mile facility built in the center of an existing highway with variable toll lanes that were reversible depending on the commute direction. It was financially closed in '93, opened for service in '95. No particular challenging structures or, in terms of tunnels or bridges. There we are. There was a provision in the original contract that, a non-compete provision, that said the state of California or Orange County was not able to build any competing facility without the consent of the concessionaire. In fact, the state attempted to breach that provision and build a competing facility. The concessionaire went to court, prevented them from doing that, and so the state found it wasn't willing to honor that provision, and so they bought the concessionaire out in order to work around that provision. So that's all I'll say about 91. I'm happy to come back to that in our later discussions. Second project, also in California, this one to the south, between the city of San Diego and the Mexican border, the South Bay Expressway, 13-mile highway. It was authorized in 1990 under the same law that authorized the first case we looked at. This one took much longer to reach financial close in 2003. The original concessionaires were bought out by Macquarie prior to financial close. The facility opened inauspiciously in November of 2007, right before the onset of the financial crisis, and one of the provisions that one of the features of the roadway was a very complex bridge project that had to be built from above, essentially, in order to protect the wetlands that were below it. The SPV filed for bankruptcy in 2010, exited in 2011. Macquarie's equity was written to 0, and the lenders took over the project, including USDOT, which had a $140 million stake in the project when it was financially closed in 2003. That had accumulated $32 million in capitalized interest. After bankruptcy, there was a $6 million, I'll focus on the federal interest in particular, $6 million equity payment, a $93 million debt, and then 32% ownership of the property going forward. So we see here the federal funding has taken a haircut. They've exchanged a loan for an equity stake. This project was purchased by the San Diego Association of Governments, which is a regional government operating in the San Diego area. The tolls were reduced and it continues to operate.